What a blessing it is to connect with you once again. Last Sunday at the Great Commission Church in Hanover Park, Illinois, our pastor, Lucia Ramirez, shared a message that left all of us reflecting deeply.
Absolutely. It was a sermon that confronted us with a crucial question. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Based on Mark 8 and Colossians 3, Pastor Lucia challenged us to examine our priorities in light of eternity.
The introduction was powerful. Human beings were created to know God, to live for eternity, and to glorify their Creator. Jesus shows us the danger of gaining the world while losing the soul. Paul calls us to set our minds on the things above.
Exactly. That is the lens through which we must see life. The message wasn't about condemning success, but about making sure that success never replaces God as our highest priority. Pastor Lucia explained that in Mark 8, Jesus uses the Greek word psyche, meaning soul, to speak about our eternal nature. Then Colossians 3 commands us to interpret life from the perspective of God's kingdom, not to despise earthly responsibilities.
The first point, based on Mark 8:36 through 37, was the soul has a value greater than anything the world can offer. Pastor Lucia contrasted how our society places a price on almost everything, yet the soul is beyond any earthly value. The application was clear. My relationship with God is the greatest investment I can ever make.
That's right. She challenged us with questions like, what consumes my thoughts? What am I willing to sacrifice first? The illustration of the wealthy art collector who left everything behind, contrasted with the missionary who left a legacy of transformed lives, made the point unmistakable. The most valuable thing you possess is not in your hands. It's within you, your eternal soul.
Then came the second point. The world promises gain, but it can rob us of what matters most. Based on Mark 8:36, Jesus intentionally uses the language of business and profit when he speaks about gaining. Pastor Lucia also reminded us of the rich fool in Luke 12.
And the application was deeply challenging. We may gain promotions while losing our family altar. The question is this: am I using the world to serve God, or am I using God to gain the world? The illustration of the boat was unforgettable. There's nothing wrong with a boat being in the water. The danger begins when the water gets inside the boat.
The third point from Colossians 3:1 through 2 was, a mind focused on earthly things produces a life without an eternal perspective. Since we have been raised with Christ, we must intentionally set our minds on the things above.
That was such a key truth. Pastor Lucia explained that our minds eventually resemble whatever we feed them the most. If I feed fear, I will live in fear. If I feed God's word, faith will begin to govern my life. Discipleship begins with the renewal of the mind. She illustrated this with a farmer who doesn't simply remove weeds, he also plants good seed.
The fourth point from Colossians 3:3 through 4 was, when Christ is your treasure, all your priorities change. Our lives are hidden with Christ in God, secure in Him. That means we no longer have to live desperately trying to prove who we are.
That truth changes everything. Work is no longer a god. It becomes a tool to glorify God. Money becomes a resource for advancing God's kingdom. The illustration of the ambassador captured it perfectly. He lives in another country, yet he represents his own kingdom. Anyone who understands that they belong to heaven is no longer enslaved by the applause of this world.
After developing those 4 points, Pastor Lucia brought us to the conclusions. She reminded us that the soul is the greatest treasure God has entrusted to us, that the world's greatest deception is convincing us that temporary things are worth more than eternal ones, that a mind filled with Christ transforms every area of life, and that living for Christ is the only investment that produces eternal rewards.
Then came the time of ministry. Pastor Lucia invited us to examine the condition of our souls and asked whether we have spent more effort securing our financial future than nurturing our fellowship with God. She reminded us that it is never too late to refocus our hearts.
She then led the congregation in a prayer of surrender. Together, we acknowledged that we have often placed our hearts on temporary things, asked God's forgiveness, and declared that Christ alone is our greatest treasure. It was truly a callback to our first love.
That's right. If you weren't able to join us last Sunday, we invite you to watch the full message. Visit www.conlgc.org/sermons or find us on YouTube at La Gran Comisión LGC. Until next time.